Hi everybody, and welcome to today's lesson in the RTS tutorial series. In this third lesson, we will cover Zoom. The learning objectives for today's session is to reinforce some previous material and how to set up inputs, which we'll also do next week. We'll talk about two conceptual approaches to zooming, and then we'll talk about 2 of 3 applied approaches to zooming. First, we need to consider what blueprints will be involved, and we'll be using our player controller. Our player controller will already hold our reference to our pawn and our controls for the camera so far. We'll now add in our zoom and reset controls as well. Now, if you decided to have if you decide you want your controls to be in your pawn instead, you can copy the controls over we have into your pawn, remove any references to the pawn itself, change out those references to self as needed, and delete the cast we have made in the controller, and instead make a cast to the controller inside of the pawn. But if you guys want me to do that, I can do that as a different lesson to show you how to go about that process. Next, we need to consider a few things. First, we need to consider what is zoom. So this is where we get the two sort of theoretical approaches to zoom. One is actually zooming in, one is not. So do we need to consider, do we need to change the focal length? Do we actually need to zoom in, or do we need to be closer to the action? Now, for high-end, ultra-realistic sort of first-person shooters or weapons-based games, this distinction is important. In those sort of games, yes, you kind of want, to change the focal length. You want actual zoom. In this case, we just want to move closer to the action. And honestly, this is what most RTSs do. And so, we'll do it as well. And in fact, in terms of coding, getting the zoom in, changing zoom versus moving the camera closer to the action, it's a bit of a trial and error experience. So, we need to consider, what do we need to do to get the camera closer? Do we move the camera, or do we change the spring arm? Now, we've put a spring arm for a reason. We set a length for a reason. We will be moving the spring arm. Yes, you can move the camera. It doesn't work as well, and it leads to issues. But there are other things we need to consider as well. So, for example, how close can the player zoom in? And conversely, how far can they zoom out? We don't want them zooming in through the map onto whatever's on the underside, which is usually nothing. We don't want them zooming out to the point they should be in space instead. Once we've considered those sort of limits, we need to consider, how do we control or limit zooming in and zooming out? And there are two options, and we'll explore both of these. So at first, when I did this, on my very first project, I used if-then statements, which is where we'll start. I then sort of thought, well, is there a way to do it where the computer doesn't need to run a check, where it just does the thing I've asked it to do and limits the number that comes out in the end? And the number is the length of the spring arm. And I found a more efficient way to do this by limiting that number, which is using clamps. And we also want to consider, do we want to hard code in our limits or use variables? I have seen tutorials use a combination of both hard coding and variables. I have seen tutorials with hard coding only. I have seen tutorials with variables only. This really is up to you. We'll be using variables, by the way. So, speaking of variables, we have 3 we need to make. And with my naming convention, I just want to point out, the idea is it should be easy to understand. And with this particular set of variables, I have not found a set of names yet that I like. Honestly, instead of zoom, it should say spring arm. Min spring arm value would make more sense. Because what this is this variable is the smallest value the spring arm can take on, which is how close can the camera get to the root? How close can we zoom in? And then we have the max of that as well, which is how far can the camera get away from the root? How far can it get away from the action? How far can we zoom out? Again, it's changing the spring arm. It's not about zooming. And finally, we have the speed. Now, I wrote on this at optimal ranges between 100 and 150, just because what I like. I actually would say it's between 100 and 200. I have found that anything above 200 is just too fast, and anything below 100 is too slow. To give you an idea how this works, these are units, whatever the Unreal unit of measurement is. These are units of measurements in Unreal. So if you did 1, that'd be like having, it would just move it very slowly. And you'd have to keep scrolling and feel that tick every time to get close. We don't want to, have it slow. We also wanted this feature to be, the setting to be open to change by the user. It doesn't change the mechanics of the game, it doesn't make it easier, it doesn't make it harder. The reason we're leaving it open to be changed by the user is so when we get to the options menu, we can practice changing some settings. And 2, so there's accessibility for our end users who might get motion sick while playing the game. That said, load up the project, and I'll see you on the other side. And so here we are back in our editor. So the first thing we need to do, just like last time, is we need to set our commands. So let's go to Settings, Project Settings. It's anchoring itself at least. And under an engine, again, we'll go to Input. And this time, we don't need access mapping. We actually need action mapping. And we need 3. The first one we need is going to be called zoom in. Again, notice the camel coding, or camel casing. Unreal will parse this when I call it, so it will read as 2 words. I need a zoom out. And I need a zoom reset as well. Now I need to give these all commands. Now let's start with the reset. I know that's going to be middle mouse button, just because I know that's what I want to do with it, for one option, with the shift key held down. So if you want to have a button or a command that requires a special key added along with it, these are where you add them. Let's say we want to do something where if they hold down shift, they move faster. Then we're going to create a different sort of setup for that. We wouldn't use these. And in fact, we'll get to that in about 2 videos. I'm going to add another key here. And for this value, I'm going to type in the word home. And this will be the home key on either the number pad if you don't have the keyboard that's set up with an insert home page up thing. And this gives the users more options. Of course, you don't need to do this. I'm going to give a second key to the zoom in, and this will be mouse wheel, if I can spell wheel, and you have your choice on up or down. Everyone has a different preference. I'm just going to do up for now, and I'll show you what down looks like as well if you want. I'm also going to add in another key that will do the same thing. And just, in case someone's using a keyboard, a really old computer without a really old laptop without a proper trackpad that has a little scrolly wheel, or virtual scroller wheel, or if the keyboard is broken, if the mouse is broken, or something else. I just want to give people more options. So, I'm going to do page up. Kind of why I chose home for this part. And I'm going to do something similar here. I'm going to do mouse wheel down. And as you saw, I already added the second one by clicking that little plus icon. And I'm going to add in page down. And now that we have our keys in place, let's just minimize them as much as we can. Let's go set these up. So let's close this out. And let us open up our controller. So you can see everything from last time is here. I haven't commented out anything simply because I have no intent on actually doing anything with these in the long run. We're going to change them, as I mentioned before. So let's move over here a bit. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our camera pawn reference again. We're actually going to need a couple of these, but we'll do that in a minute. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to type in zoom reset. Let's put the reset in first. Just because it'll be slightly easier. And give me 1 second, I just need to open up my cheat sheets. And how we're going to do the reset is we've already decided that we're going to move the spring arm. And the way we move the spring arm is simply, if we open up the camera, is simply by changing this value here. So, since we have a reference to this blueprint in our controller, and we've already know we can call our spring arm, as we've seen here, or sorry, as we know we can call it components. This isn't the spring arm, I realize. Let's call the spring arm from here. So we drag off the pawn reference, and we're going to type in spring arm, or spring. And you'll see it's under variables, the default, because it's one of the included aspects of that, or sorry, included components. So you want to get it. We're not setting anything about it. And what do we want to get from this? We want to get the length. Actually, no, sorry, we don't want to get the length. We want to set the length of the arm. So we're going to type in target arm length. So we want to set it. And we want this to happen when we press those buttons. Now, what number do we put here? Do we create a variable for it? Well, we could. But we know what this default value is. We've set, sorry, wrong window. We set the default value in here. So we'll set it to 1500 here as well. Now, how do I know to call this? Well, there's two ways I knew. First, trial and error in finding it. And second, the component has that name right there, the natural length of the spring arm when there's no collisions. It's known as target arm length. If you're not sure what to call it, just right click and type in whatever you need. You know, if you know you have to call it from a reference to something like the camera pawn, let's actually just type in arm length. Unfortunately, nothing shows up for that without us having the spring arm first. So, I mean, sometimes we'll be able to get these things earlier, but if we pull off, we have different variables or different nodes that come up due to context sensitivity. If we turn it off, we can see all the variables. So now that we have our zoom reset set up, we can't really test it because we can't zoom yet, but we're going to comment out and call this reset zoom. So the next thing we need to do is, you know, I'm just going to actually take these and copy them, because I'm going to need them in a minute. And I'm just going to go down here where I have a little bit more room. I'm going to paste them there. And just like I do with the input, just like I do with the forward and sideways actions, I'm going to place around them my zoom in. Just move that there. And my zoom out. So, what do I need to get for this to work? Well, I need to set the arm length. And we've already decided that we're going to set the arm length by setting some variables. So let's make those variables now. So the first one we're going to do, and I'm going to double check the cheat sheet I have, if I can figure out where I've put it. There we go. And yes, the cheat sheet I'm using for this one right now is the PowerPoint presentation I used. Min zoom limit. Now the wording here is really confusing, and I've struggled trying to find wording I like for it. And to be fair, I haven't. Once we've set it, we're going to make it a float. And we're going to compile and save it so we get our minimum. So how close do we want the person to be able to get into the, how far do we want to be able to zoom in? So this is the min length of the spring arm. Let's say we only want them to be 300 units in. We're going to create another variable, and we'll name this one max for maximum zoom limit. And this is how long the spring arm can get. And again, we're going to compile so we can get the default value there. And we're going to set this to 4,000. I am literally just picking random numbers. My cheat sheet actually has numbers on it, but I closed out the original cheat sheet I was going to use prior to this, and I don't want to really dig through my computer whilst recording, and I don't want to pause and edit. Mostly because it's such a minor thing right now, these two numbers. You can set them to whatever you think is appropriate, so long as min is smaller than the default length and max is greater than the default length. I mean, if you set it incorrectly and then reset your zoom with the command we just did earlier, you would notice the error, but otherwise you might not. So, yeah. Alright, the next thing we need to do after that is let's add our zoom speed in. I have seen this called camera zoom speed, camera sensitivity, zoom sensitivity, and different tutorials. Everyone has some version of this though. And this one we want to be editable. I can never say that word well. And we're going to save it. And just like with the other ones, I'm going to be cheap and just copy these in from my PowerPoint. And we want the default limit to be, I'm going to set it at 150 for now. And I'm also going to be cheap and copy over the tooltips from the PowerPoint for that one and for that one. And I'm going to compile and save. So now that we have our variables in place, there's something else I want to do. I want to just organize my work area a tiny bit, and I'm going to call this a movement, or I'm going to call it a category movement variables. Again, notice I put no spaces in there, just camel coded, and Unreal automatically split it for me. Now with categories you can actually put spaces in. I just am so used to not doing that I still camel code, and the lovely, lovely Unreal Engine knows what I mean. Alright, now that I've done that, what do I need? Well, I need to know what the arm length currently is. So similar to what we did with the zoom reset, where we set the length, now we want to get the length. So we're going to type in target arm, and we have length, and we get the get right away. Okay, so the length will be modified by the speed. The reason why length is modified by speed is the speed at which you're zooming in and out is how fast that arm is changing, and that really is kind of the increment of change. So if we set this to a really low number, so that's a 1 for example, it would be a very slow, the person would have to keep scrolling their wheel, and it would move 1 unit at a time, from 1500 to 1499 to 1498 to 1497 to 1490, so on. Where they're at 100, I'm moving from 1500 to 1400 to 1300. So it really is, it isn't speed in the sense that it's, quick or slow. It's speed in terms of, for the user, yeah, that'll be quick or slow, but in terms of the maths, it's the increment at which we are taking away or adding to this arm length. So let's just drag this in here. So we're going to get it. We're just going to leave it here, sitting out here for a second. So let's think about this logically for a moment. We need to take these two values, the arm length and the zoom, and modify the arm length based on the zoom to either zoom in or zoom out. So, well, if the longer the arm is, the farther away the camera is, then if we add these two values together, if we add 1500, because that's what it's defaulting to 150, we are going to get farther away. So we know if we do addition, that we're zooming out. So I'm going to drag off of here, and I'm going to type in plus, and I'm going to go for float plus float. I'm also going to put a readout node in, and I'm going to drag off of this one, and based on that same logic, I know I'm going to need a subtraction up here, so float minus float. And what are they going to be subtracted from? Well, they are going to be subtracted from or added to, of course, our zoom speed. Now, order kind of does matter for this one because it's a minus, but fortunately, I put zoom in on top. If you've done this in reverse, you might have to have going to have crossing nodes. Crossing spaghetti lines here. So let's just plug that into there. Now, additive property means it doesn't matter which one's where. I dislike being neat and not having my lines cross. So we're going to move that there. I'm just going to move this a bit so we have it look a little bit nicer. Alright, so now we have set kind of our new our spring arm lengths. You know, we're either closer or we're either farther away. We need to tell the system to take this number and apply it to the target arm. So just like with the zoom reset, we are going to set the length of the spring arm. And just to make my life easier, I'm going to move these slightly forward. Move this forward as well. And I'm going to just do that as well. And I'm going to double click here, and I'm going to add another reroute in. I could just copy these and, you know, make a new reference to them, or paste new references in, but again, I want to be clean and as efficient as possible. So I'm going to drag off of here, and I'm going to type in target arm and select set target arm length. And I'm going to do this, do Control W to duplicate, and I'm going to drag off that reroute node and do it down here as well. And then I'm going to drag these out here, and I'm just going to plug that value into there and that value into there, and then I'm going to take off from the press. So when they press this down, we don't have to worry about them because they're not really releasing it. When they press down, that's what's going to happen. When they press down on this one, that will happen. And just to make this a little bit neater, so when you're looking at it, you can see kind of clearly what's going on. Just going to create some little reroutes so that it's just a little bit neater. A little bit easier to read. Okay, so let's test it. Make sure this works. Now, we are going to run into some issues. If you were following along with the tutorial at the start, you will know what those issues are. So, let's just make sure we can go forward, we can go backward, we can go left, we can go right, we can go diagonal, and we can zoom in. Ooh, well, there seems to be an issue. Well, where are we zoomed into? We're way too close. And we can go on forever. Now, we already knew this was going to happen. Like I said in the introduction, we had to consider, you know, how far can they zoom in. I'm assuming that's a negative spring arm length right there. So we need to set the lengths. We need to use these min and maxes that we set up earlier. And there's a few ways in which we can use them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect these set lengths, because we need to actually have something happen first. And we're actually going to disconnect that part, and that we're actually going to disconnect, you know what, just delete that for now. We'll keep one because we'll just duplicate it as needed. And we need to figure out, you know, how to approach this. And as I mentioned, when I was first, you know, working on this, my training had always been think about if statements. If an if statement doesn't work, think about for loops. Well, I gotta say loops don't work for this. An if statement actually kind of does. You know, it's not the best way to do this, but it's practical enough. So, when we are zooming in, we are going to the lower limit of our spring arm. We're moving towards that lower number that the spring arm can get. So we're going to take our min zoom, which is the smallest value that we've allowed our spring arm to take, and we are going to get it. And we want to know, is this value greater than or less than the output of this? So, you can do this a few different ways. And the joys of if statements is they can be as confusing as you want them to be. We could have actually done, you know, we could have reversed this so that it is greater than instead of less than. And want to think about this for half a second to make sure I'm doing this right. So if we go from 115 to, let's say, 14 is 14. Yeah. So we want to make sure that the limit is still smaller than the output. We could do it the other way around, where we want to make sure the output is greater than the limit. It's literally saying the same thing. It's just reversing this command and reversing the order the pins go in. And then off of this, we're going to have a branch. And of course, our pressed will go into there. Let's move this up just so it's a straight line, because I like straight lines. I don't know why. And if this statement is true, if this value is smaller than our result, then we haven't violated our min length. So we want to set the length of the arm to the result from the target arm length minus the zoom speed. So I'm just going to take a reroute node off of the middle of that, and I'm going to plug it into there, just like I had before. I'm just going to do this, make it a little bit nicer looking for me. Sorry if this is just eating up time, I realize. Alright, so that's part of it. And of course I need to add in this little fun guy, which we will just drag you up there. Now, what happens if the statement's false? Well, if it were to run, we would have the same effect as we had earlier. The camera would go past the min zoom, assuming this conditional statement wasn't here. So we don't want it to go past there. If we're at, say, what was our min zoom again? It was 300. If we're at 350 and our zoom speed is 150, that means the target arm length currently at 350 minus 150 would put us below this value. It would put us at 200. And 200, of course, is smaller than 300. We don't want it to ever be smaller than this 300. So instead of taking this value, we'll simply drop it down to the minimum length we've set. So I'm going to duplicate this node. I'm going to drag off the false here. I'm going to properly plug it in. And despite what I said earlier about wanting to be neat and clean, I'm going to take the min zoom length. I am going to get it. I'm going to plug it into here. And then off of this blue line, I'm going to put a reroute node in and plug it into there. As for the other end of the equation, pretty much remains the same. So I'm just going to highlight all of this just to make my life easier. I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste it. Except for I'm going to regret having done that, I think, in a second, just because it's not as organized as I want it to be. I'm going to drag off the pressed and plug it into our branch like before. And this time, I'm going to move this node up here. I'm also going to move both of these up there, because it'll make my life just so much easier in the long run. And like before, this gets plugged into there. And what we need this time is our maximum length, because we're adding to our target arm length. And we don't want to go above our maximum of 4,000. So if you drag off, instead of putting get, just hover it over the point here, and it will automatically put that pin in for you. Now, I'm just going to grab this reroute node, bring it down here, and I'm going to pull it into there. And honestly, in terms of the zoom, we have everything we need to do done. Let's compile and save it. Let's make sure it works. Yep, I can't zoom in any further. I can't zoom out any further. Ooh. Alright, what did I do wrong? It should be very obvious to anyone who caught what I did at the start of it. I didn't even notice, but just having watched it twice, I worked it out. If you remember, I duplicated the end of the original statement. I forgot to change the min zoom limit. So let's delete that out and add in max zoom. I will say this is the one bug I actually didn't intentionally put in so far. That was just me being careless as I went quickly. So Sorry about that little jump there. I had a slight issue recording. I had to pause the recorder and restart it. So now that we've compiled and saved it, let's double check that it's working and that we've done nothing. Ooh. Okay. Okay, that shouldn't have happened. Well, something appears to be wrong. Okay, so that would be a slight problem. You shouldn't have that issue happen. That happened because I started to delete the code I had worked on because I thought I'd have to redo this recording. Fortunately, I think it was 4,000 I set this to. I don't have to. Now, I'll say, from trial and error, just for my own taste, I found 100 to 150 to be the best choice for this. And that's simply from just trying different numbers in there and seeing what didn't make me get bored, annoyed, or nauseous. There we go. And now we can't zoom out any further, we can't zoom in any further, and we can move, and we can zoom as we move, except for we can still go way outside the map. Okay, so we got most of this done. In fact, actually, I'd say you think we're done, right? You know, this is Zoom, we have it working. Well, as I said during the, PowerPoint, I thought that, this was the way to start. And it is just that, the way to start. This code, or the script, works fine. It does exactly what it needs to do. But it isn't efficient. When we get to this point, it's running an if check every time we move that middle wheel on the mouse. Oh, I forgot to check something real quick. We're going to test one more thing before we go any further. I'm not going to use the middle wheel. I'm using the page up, page down, home to reset, page up, home to reset. And we're going to do the same with the mouse real quick. So I'm going to zoom in, and it was shift, middle wheel, and it resets. Awesome, so that works. Going back to what I was saying, again, sorry about that, this really isn't efficient. Every time we hit this, it does this check. Every single time. So when I was hitting page up and page down, you can actually hear the clicks. If you're comfortable on your mouse, you can feel when the wheel hits a notch. So you know that every time that happens, it runs that check. Well, we could do something else, actually. We can, delete a good chunk of this. So that's what we're going to do. But we're going to only delete part of it. So I want to show you how I work. And I meant to take a screenshot of my sort of master sheet where I have, I think, 6 iterations of this just in a line, just so I can see how I was going to show it to you guys over the course of the lectures, or the tutorials. Sorry about that. Again, used to being in university. So what I'm going to do is I'm only going to delete this top part here. I'm going to leave the bottom part in just so I have a reference to how it was set up before. So I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to simply delete it. I'm also going to take these and delete it. And off of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a clamp a clamp function in for a float. And what a clamp does is it says the minimum value that comes out of here can never be smaller than this, whatever we put in there. And the maximum value that comes out of this can never be greater than this. Now, in terms of, clamping this, we set this at 1500 and leave it as is and just put the min in. We're fine. But, I'm paranoid, so I'm going to put both the min in and our max. And I'm also going to put a reroute node into here, just so it, is a little bit nicer looking. So that every time now that it runs this equation, it just clamps it instead of running a check. It just goes, all right, nope, move on to the next part kind of thing. Move on to use this number kind of thing. And the great part of this is we really only need to have one statement coming off the end here. So I'm just going to Control W. And the reason why we only need one statement is if we violate our min, if we, we're at 350 here, and we zoom out and thus bring us down to, zoom in and bring us down to 200, this clamp will stop it. It will put it at 300 instead. And I'm just going to drag off of here, And I'm going to drag back to our pressed. And before we do anything else, I'm going to compile and save it. And I'm going to test my zoom in, see if there are any issues. There does not appear to be. Zoom out, and I'm going to try it from page in. If I click on the screen there, sorry. And I'm going to zoom in. And again, we have no problem with it. So I'm going to now do the same to the back end of the code here, the bottom end for the zoom out. I'm going to take all of this, I'm going to delete it. Really wish I hadn't deleted that blue reroute node, because I'm putting one in this just to make it look slightly prettier. And again, I'm going to control W this. I am going to take the clamp, because it's going to be quite literally the same thing, and control W that as well. And that goes into there. Our addition goes into the value we want to clamp. And I'm just going to drag that down here, just so it's a little bit easier for me to see. Put it back that way for now. That up. Move that there. And plug that in. Or miss the mark all in and go way past where I wanted to. Okay, now that that's set up, I'm going to comment this one out, because this one we aren't going to change anymore. I'm going to just drag it down a little bit. Zoom out. And I'm going to do the same up here after I fix this line, because it's going to drive me crazy. And yes, I realize my way I set up the nodes on each side of the sort of references we're pulling is different. And I'll name this one Zoom In. And let me tighten this back up just a tiny bit so that it's not eating up as much room. And, you know, you can put this wherever you want. I'm just going to put this here for now. And I'm going to comment all of these. And I'm going to just name Zoom Controls. So our zoom features are now set up. So I'm just going to move these here so we have them close by for reference. Going to compile and save. If I can find the save button. Then I'm going to hit Control-Shift-S to make sure that everything that I have here in this project saves. So next time, we're going to go over pan and resetting our pan. And we're going to really start to see issues with the way this camera is set up. And those issues at that point will be so apparent that we're going to actually have to delete this and redo it. Actually, I say we're going to have to delete this. We're just going to delete these two nodes and that, if I remember to delete it from this version. Like I said last time, I was looking at my master code for this and I forgot to delete it. So just randomly working on something, I went, why is there this node there? And was trying to figure out what it was doing, and I had it so badly placed. It was pretty much the same spot. There was a lot more blue wires coming off of this one that it looked like there was a wire coming from there, and it took me a minute to realize there wasn't. That said, I hope to see you next time. And again, please let me know if there's any content you want me to cover, any topics you want to see, any questions about the things we've done so far that I haven't been clear on. Please let me know in the comments down below. Send me a message on Twitter. And if you like what I've done today, please drop a like notification. It lets me know I'm bringing you content you value and appreciate. And make sure to hit that notification icon and bell so you know when the next tutorial is out. As always, I look forward to seeing you next time and hope you have a great day.